I must say I was relieved for quite a while to not have to talk about Ukraine anymore. But then I remember that many Israeli prime ministers are Ukrainian or Russian or Polish or Eastern European. That's the point of, Israel being a colony anyway. So nevertheless, I want to show you something about Ukraine, which is very important. And it shows, again, that you have been lied to by the media. They lied about Iraq. They lied about Syria. They lied about Libya. They lie about Ukraine. And so, of course, they lie about what's happening in Palestine and make the Israelis look like they are victims when they're the perpetrators of genocide. This is an interview done by 1+1, which is a Ukrainian channel. And they're talking here with David Arakamia, right? So he is basically the leader of the Servant of the People faction. And he talks about the peace talks that Zelensky, that the Ukraine had with the Russians. Why is this important? Because we were told that, the Russians don't want peace. The Russians are aggressors. The Russians don't care about international law, blah, blah, blah. And so that's a lie. The Russians offered a peace deal within the first weeks of the war. And then the Russians, as Putin held up the peace agreement, he said that the Russians signed it, they were ready, and the Ukrainians signed the draft agreement. And then Boris Johnson comes out of nowhere and says, Ukraine, you're not going to sign this. You're going to fight the Russians like you're told and do as you're told. Anyway, watch the interview. Wow. So it was true. Now we have yet again more confirmation that our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, this fumbling buffoon, is actually a very, very mindful and astute and purposely went and sabotaged the peace negotiations. Well done. So you murdered God knows how many countless men, young men. You sent them, to a meat grinder, both Russian and Ukrainian men. For what? For what? What did you achieve? And I mean, the defenses that the Russians have, the way the Russians are dug in, my goodness, you need a miracle. You need a miracle to get them out. I was reporting about this, how the Russians have put in multiple lines of defenses, right? So the territory that Ukrainians have been able to recover since the beginning of the war is insanely, I mean, it's non-existent. Non-existent. It's not even worth talking about. Nothing. The Ukrainians have recovered nothing. That means that the front lines, or the lines, shall we say, of the battle are not going to change now. And especially with everyone's attention being focused on Gaza, rightfully so. Again, I'm only talking about this because it shows yet again how the mainstream media constantly lie. They constantly lie, and they're doing the same things that they're doing, that they did about Russia and Ukraine. They're doing it now again about Israel and Palestine. The same huge lies. So Putin held up the agreement. He says, the guy they were interviewing here, David, he's saying that why didn't Putin publish the agreement? Well, he held it up. I mean, he did hold it up. Look, it's pretty clear. You can even see it, and people were translating it with the higher quality footage. Look. This is again during the African summit. So they basically he had a delegation. The African summit was in Moscow, but that was a separate event. There's an African peace delegation that was sent, headed by Cyril Ramaphosa from South Africa, and he went to see Zelensky and went to meet Putin as well, and tried to get them both to agree on a diplomatic settlement, to come to some sort of agreement. And this is when Putin held up the document. Just watch the video because it's important and it relates to what we were just watching.
Дорогие друзья, Россия никогда не отказывалась от переговоров. Вот хочу обратить ваше внимание на то, что при содействии того же президента Эрдогана, как вы знаете, в Турции прошла целая серия переговоров между Россией и Украины по выработке и мер доверия, о которых вы сказали, и по подготовке самого текста договора. Этот договор, мы не договаривались с украинской стороной, что он будет носить конфиденциальный характер, но мы никогда его не предъявляли, не комментировали. Проект этого договора был парафирован руководителем переговорной группы из Киева. Он поставил там свою подпись. Вот он. Он есть. Он так и называется. Договор о постоянном нейтралитете и гарантиях безопасности Украины. Именно о гарантиях, о которых вы сказали, уважаемый друг президент Южноафриканской Республики. 18 статей. Более того, к нему есть еще и приложение. Они, знаете, сейчас даже не буду об этом говорить, они касаются и вооруженных сил, касаются других вещей. Все прописано до единиц боевой техники и до личного состава вооруженных сил. Вот этот документ. Он парафирован киевской делегацией. Подпись стоит. Но после того, как мы, как и обещали, отвели войска от Киева, киевские власти, как обычно, делают их хозяева, выбросили это все на свалку истории. Скажем так аккуратно и постараюсь интеллигентно выражаться.
As usual, you can't trust the West to sign anything. They lied about the 2+4 negotiations about not expanding NATO. They lied to the Palestinians in the Oslo Accords. They lied to the Iranians in the nuclear deal. You can't trust a goddamn thing they say or sign. You can't trust it. Even in writing, on paper, black and white, it's trash. Here's what Putin is talking about. You see how during the first push in the war, the Russians surrounded the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, and then magically they pulled out, right? All of a sudden, and the only, the people on MSNBC. So actually, this is how it was before, right? And then they pulled out. They no longer surrounded Kiev, and they went back here. And this is where the front line has stayed ever since. Okay, this is the latest one from November 25th, so from 3 days ago. And so the analysis from these brilliant, military minds at MSNBC was that, the Russians are scared and, they were pushed back. No, they weren't. The Russians left Kiev to show Zelensky that they're not trying to get rid of him. They're not a threat to the administrative capital and the capital of Ukraine. They did that as a gesture of goodwill to show that what they're saying in the agreement in this peace deal is legit. Putin is saying it himself. Putin is surrounded by the president of Egypt. He's sitting at a table with the South African president and a delegation of African presidents. He is not a clown who's going to hold up a fake paper. It's real. It's real. And everything that he's saying here is real. And now it's been confirmed multiple times that Boris Johnson sabotaged the negotiations. And now you're hearing it from the head of Zelensky's faction that, he was there, that, this agreement is real and it exists. He doesn't deny that they signed it. He just said, why doesn't Putin publish it? Okay, I don't know why. Maybe he was trying to stop you from he was trying to save you, some embarrassment. I don't know. I think the Russians tried talking, and when, they saw it's going nowhere, and they threw the agreement in the trash. They said, okay, well, if you want to fight, let's fight. It's very, very tragic because this whole thing could have been stopped a few weeks in. Could have been stopped a long time ago, actually, because I reiterate, NATO expansion is really not difficult to understand. The only people that try to make it complicated are jerks and jagoffs. NATO told Russia, we won't expand past the Elbe. They promised this. It's in the meeting minutes. This is a fact. It's black and white in the historical record. Western diplomats told the Russians no NATO expansion. They lied. No one heard of Putin. No one ever heard of Putin back then. Putin was no one until the early 2000s. Did NATO expand? Yes, it did. It kept expanding. It kept expanding. Did Putin invade Ukraine before? No. This went out of got out of hand and was blown out of proportion in 2022. But it started way before that in 2014. So there's a long road since the 2+4 negotiations that led to what is happening in Ukraine today. The Russians are not crazy about occupying Ukraine. The Russians are trying to create a buffer between NATO and themselves. Now, I personally think that this should have been settled diplomatically. The Russians should have stayed in Russia, and this could have stayed Ukraine. But the problem is the Ukrainians kept killing the Russian speakers there, the ethnic Russians, and letting in NATO. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you can't tell the largest country on earth that, they're just silly and they're trying to get more territory. It's the largest country on earth. You think they really give a crap about this tiny speck of land here? Really? You think they're that dumb? Russia has 9 time zones. They're really not in need of more land, I can assure you. They don't need more land, and they don't care about that or the Russian Empire. This is so funny watching Western imperialists accuse the Russians of imperialism. What empire? Well, how many bases do they have around the world, huh? They got troops all over Africa like you and all over the Middle East like you? Bollocks. You have 1 military base in Syria, one naval base that's been there since the Cold War, and that's it. Oh, and there was going to be one in Sudan, but, all of a sudden they're fighting now. Burhan and Dagalo, Hemeti. In any case, I want to show you MSNBC, these great military minds who are saying that, Ukraine is going to win the war and Putin this and Putin that and Putin bad. Look at how they've changed their tune. This is from this week. Watch in awe.
NATO's done an extraordinary job. How much longer do we continue pushing, I think, what many people in the Pentagon would think is the unrealistic goal of Ukraine driving every last Russian out of their country?
It's exactly the right question, Joe. And what concerns me is when people get this.
Wow. I mean, I don't mean to pause him already 10 seconds in, but I like how he says that he thinks just like the Pentagon. Yes, we know. Wow. I mean, this is heresy. This is heresy. If you said this 10 months ago, you'd be taken off the air. How dare you? How dare you try to subvert and undermine the glorious patriotic resistance of the Ukrainians against the Russian imperialist occupation? How dare you?
Increasingly come to where you and I are, that as desirable as it is, it's simply not feasible. They're going to increasingly say, and we're hearing it in the House, we're hearing it in parts of Europe, why should we keep doing this? We're already stretched. We're trying to support Israel. We're worried about Taiwan. And even if we give everything we need to give or want to give to Ukraine, it still won't lead to success. What I argue, therefore, is the United States needs to have some very direct conversations with Ukraine, with President Zelensky, talk about reducing their emphasis on liberating land, increasingly put all their emphasis on holding on to what they've got. In the long run, diplomatically, through sanctions, yes, we can try to see the rest of their territory return. But for right now, let's have 80% of this country safe, 80% of this country rebuilt. I would actually propose a ceasefire as an interim arrangement to expose the Russians for what they are, so we can rebuild support for Ukraine in this country. But it's not, we've had 2 fighting seasons. The idea that 1 or 2 or 3 more years of this is going to result in success, I simply don't see it. Russia's on a war footing. They have access also to arms from North Korea and Iran. So I just think, any time in foreign policy, any time in life, there's a big gap between what you're trying to do and your ability to do it. You've either got to increase your means or lower your goals. And I think here the only realistic option as a tactical measure is to lower our goals.
Well, Caddy, the situation is often fluid, has been fluid in Ukraine for quite some time. But we're at a new stage, just like we talked about after October 7th. That war was going to go in stages. The Ukrainian war has gone in stages, and now Russia is dug in defensively. They're not having generals run up to the line so snipers can take them out. They're not exposing themselves to aerial bombardment. They are dug in a defensive posture, and that.
I mean, I'm so glad and I'm honored actually to have Joe Scarborough finally catch up to the news of 4 months ago. Well done, everybody! Please, a round of applause for good morning, Joe. Yes, the Russians are dug in. Congratulations, you've unearthed the mysteries of the universe. I mean, what does that mean? You needed 4 months to realize that? Look, Wall Street Journal, they it's so funny. They were publishing like some exclusive report about Russian defenses, and they wanted people to pay for it too. Like you have to pay to read their old news. And they were saying things that people were talking about months before, right? That people understood the military aspects of what's happening in Ukraine. That these trenches, and again, it's not just trenches are one aspect of the lines that the Russians have built. They have like an entire system. You've got trees, artillery in them with howitzers, cannons, mortars. Then you have trenches for men to sit in to get dug in. Then you have, of course, tank traps. Then you have dragon's teeth. Then barbed wire. Repeat. I mean, all the main roads to every town and village have been blocked, so you can't have advances. It's murder trying to get through that. Murder. No one can do that short of dropping, getting the U.S. Air Force involved. Yeah, you could do that, but then it's a world war. So, the Ukrainians are screwed. They're screwed, and NATO screwed them. This is what happens when you are, when you put your faith in the United States and Britain, and you do it in just blindly, right? You blindly trust them. They screw you. Everyone who's ever been a stooge for the West gets screwed in the end. Truly. This is the case of the Kurds. The Kurds have been used by the Americans. Look how they screwed them in 2019. They just threw them to the wolves. And now they then go back and try to jump in bed with them and say, well, okay, if you give us some of the oil, then we'll stay with you here. But, they threw them to the wolves, to Turkey. And then, of course, they've done that before in the past with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was also doing the Americans' dirty work for them against Iran, which is very, unfortunate, to put it mildly. He was working to America's benefit. And they, at the end, what did they do? They starved, a million Iraqis. They killed scores of children. I mean, at least 500,000 kids with UN sanctions, which is scandalous. And then, of course, they came and hanged him, right? So they hanged this man. I mean, they put him in a noose and killed him and filmed it for the world to see. And then Gaddafi, the same thing. Gaddafi, again, I'm not comparing him to Saddam Hussein, but he thought that if he gives Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president or soon to be president, he thought that if he donates millions of dollars to his campaign, that he won't turn against him. And it's Sarkozy out of all the people on earth that turns against him with the Americans and kills him. You can't reason with the West. You can't jump in bed with them. You can't have backdoor deals or arrangements with them. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that Gaddafi is stupid or something like that. Not at all. But I don't know what he was thinking by, it was definitely he got stabbed in the back, to put it mildly. They screwed Libya, and they, again, killed him on camera. They filmed it, and they lynched him and filmed it. So, this is what happens when you have any kinds of dealings with the West. They screw you in the end. Zelensky is another example. He got screwed. Look at him begging for money. I'll show you in a second. Actually, I'll let MSNBC Joe finish.
Lines are moving.
Yeah, the Russians had enough time as Ukraine was preparing this offensive to build those defensive lines with trenches and landmines and making it very difficult for the Ukrainians to push through. I was told recently that the Ukrainians have only taken back 0.25% of the land that Russia took in the east of the country. That is.
Hold on, repeat that. How much?
Ukrainians to push through. I was told recently that the Ukrainians have only taken back 0.25% of the land that Russia took in the east of the country. That is nothing, and clearly not nearly enough to persuade policymakers up on Capitol Hill that it's worth carrying on funding them. Now, the Europeans have actually now matching
0.25%. I mean, that is scandalous. I feel bad for them. I really do. Because you got all these young men that are being sent to the meat grinder, sent to the front lines. You got so many people killed for no goddamn reason, just because Boris Johnson wants to go down and, play errand boy for NATO. Scandalous. I don't know how these people sleep at night. How do you sleep at night? It's forget the land for a second. The men, you have like an entire generation of men, like a chunk that's been taken out of Ukraine now. All their best men killed. And I don't know what to say. And the Russians, the same thing. How many Russians have been killed because of this? And how many Russian ethnic, Russians and Russian speakers were killed in Donbass for a long time and nobody cared? This is all NATO's fault. This could have been stopped a long time ago with diplomacy, but they never allow diplomacy to run its course. It's always got to be violence. Always make a deal, back out, make a deal, violate the terms. Even the ceasefire you're seeing now. The Israelis violated several of the terms, right? I already got into that before, but, just scandalous. I mean, really scandalous. I told you this day would come. They're going to throw Ukraine to the wolves, and they've done it. And now Ukraine has lost all this territory. I don't know if we can say that, Russia's security has been that improved by that much. I mean, obviously, people are going to think twice about messing with them. But the thing is that, they did add Finland, which has a very, very, very long border with Russia, to NATO and Finland. Neutrality between so Finland's neutrality vis-a-vis, especially Russia, has been a big, big issue for a long time. And he even mentions that in this interview, right, that we were watching earlier. He mentions Finland. So, I must say that militarily, once again, the West have failed. This is it's unequivocal. It's crystal clear. The West have failed. Israel failed in Gaza. It failed to destroy Hamas. It failed to disrupt or destroy Hamas's infrastructure. It failed to take Gaza by ground. It failed to penetrate it. It failed to engage the Hamas fighters in any fashion. And in parallel, the Russians, NATO failed to defeat Russia. NATO failed to retake Ukrainian land. NATO failed to deter Russia, although it's really Russia who's deterring NATO, not the other way around. But, just complete failure. They can't win on the ground. And it's just like Afghanistan. It's another, shambolic, just embarrassment. And the people in Washington don't care because they're not the ones whose reputations are at stake or the ones fighting it. For them, it's a money-making business. So as far as they're concerned, the war in Ukraine's done its job. They made the money. It's not going anywhere. You have a lot of corruption in Ukraine, unfortunately, I have to say. I mean, even this was the consensus in mainstream media before the war, that Ukraine is a very corrupt country. And Zelensky and a lot of his people, they've siphoned off funds. He even had to fire some of the people in his cabinet a few months ago because they were siphoning off funds. They were stealing money that was being sent to them from the West. And you have to remember, a lot of people in the West are suffering, have been suffering, and are still suffering due to this inflation, the blowback from sanctions. Europe hasn't recovered from that. Who's going to rebuild Nord Stream 2? Who is going to repair the ties that have been broken between Russia and the rest of Europe? Because these ties are very sensitive, and they had to be rebuilt after World War II, after the Germans committed genocide against the Soviet Union, against Slavs, against Jews. It's a miracle the Russians even speak to them, right? But these ties were slowly rebuilt, and now they've all gone to shit because the Americans wanted to, play dictator and divide and conquer, and as the saying goes, keep the Russians out and the Europeans down. They achieved that objective politically, but militarily they failed on the battlefield, just like in Vietnam, just like in Iraq, just like in Syria, just like in Libya, right? They could only do it by imposing a no-fly zone. But, they didn't really fight any force there. In Iraq, they created Daesh. They claim they're going in to fix their own mess. What have they achieved? They're the ones running Daesh. There's nothing to defeat. They lost in Syria. They couldn't coup Bashar al-Assad. They're losing against Hamas. They're losing against Hezbollah. The West can't win wars on the ground. The only thing that they know how to do is, kill civilians, use sanctions to do that as well, and then make money from the arms industry. So now all this money that's going to Israel, this $14 billion, once again, the stocks that have to be replenished after Israel uses the American weapons that are located in occupied Palestine, these have to be replenished. Who makes money? Arms manufacturers. European countries donated a lot of their stockpiles to the Ukrainians. They now have to replenish those stockpiles. They're making money for the arms manufacturers. The same thing in the United States. Tons and tons of money that are changing hands behind the scenes that you don't see. So, they made their money and they're happy. And now they've thrown Ukraine to the wolves. Well done. I don't know what to say. It's sad for all the people that have died. Zelensky is a clown for ever thinking that he could trust the West. I mean, what was he thinking? He's taking orders. He's an errand boy. He's never had any say in any of this, right? So he's just a poster boy because he played he played president on television. So he was groomed for the role, and then he was begging for money just 2 weeks ago, right? So there's this video where he was asking the West to send money because they're running dry. I mean, the fact we almost came, we came very close to a world war is over this. My goodness, it's scary. It's really scary. We were there. We might still be there. I don't know how far they're willing to take this, but it seems like interest in Ukraine is done. I mean, it's the mainstream media are slowly starting to condition you into accepting that Ukraine's not a big deal anymore. Look, we tried, it didn't work out. I guess it's time to pack up. This is why even on MSNBC they're saying these things, right? And it's really funny. It's really funny because if you said this a few months ago, you would be accused of treason. You would be accused of being a Putin puppet. I'm serious. If you said that, oh, well, we've given Ukraine enough, they failed to take back any land. It's a hopeless endeavor. Who could possibly succeed in such to negotiate such obstacles, literally? This is a hopeless undertaking. You would be accused of being a Putin puppet and this and that and working for Moscow. But now it's normal. It's okay because they've got bigger fish to fry. Israel's getting its ass handed to it. Israel is failing to do anything. Public opinion is turning against Israel. Got to help Israel.
If you can't give us some financial support, okay, please give us a credit, and we will give you back money. If you,
I don't know if he's doing a bit. I don't know if he's doing a bit or what this is, but it seems kind of cringy. I feel bad. I'm getting secondhand embarrassment here, but oh man.
Americans when it comes to military spending on Ukraine, but they wouldn't be able to pick up all of the slack. I guess the only question with what you're proposing, Richard, is that would that then look like victory for Vladimir Putin? I mean, effectively, he'll be able to sell that, and he will sell that as victory back at home. But even if we step back with a more objective eye and think, well, okay, so they didn't take Kyiv, but they took a big chunk of the country in the east, and was this an indication that the Russians actually won effectively?
I don't think so. Look where Russia started.
Yes, well done. You're starting to get the memo.
They wanted to basically eliminate Ukraine as a sovereign, independent.
Yeah. Again, just like, Hamas want to eliminate all the Jews, which is why they've never attacked Jews anywhere except those colonizing their land. Yeah, okay. Again, it's so funny how they come up with these fairy tales. Oh, Hamas want to eliminate the Jews. Putin wants to eliminate Ukraine and wipe it off the map. Well, what rubbish is this? You failed. You had a military objective of kicking the Russians out. You failed to take back any land. It's not whether you like it or I like it or we don't like it. Did you succeed in the objective? No, then you failed. It's not an opinion. You can measure these things. You have maps. You can quantify the land mass and see what is under Russian control, what is not. Same thing with Hamas. Did Israel beat Hamas? No. Hamas achieved their military objective of exchanging Israeli hostages for Palestinian hostages. They won. What a sad sight. What a sorry sight. Anyway, I just want to show you this because it's important to understand that they lied about the peace agreement. Russia offered peace in the first few weeks. Now, you might be saying, well, they shouldn't have been in Ukraine in the first place. Yes, I would have much preferred that to any war because everybody suffered from that. Of course, the people who died on the front line the most, but everybody all over the world suffered higher food prices, higher electricity prices. I think my energy bill went up 110%, 111%. I don't remember. Something ridiculous, right? So people suffered from that economically everywhere. Now, the silver lining of that is that it kickstarted the multipolar world or gave it a turbo boost, shall we say. That's the only silver lining. But at what cost, right? This is a fact. NATO murdered an entire generation of young men on the front line between Russia and Ukraine for nothing, to make money. This is a fact. And the media are like slowly trying to get you back to baseline because it's a failed war, and they've thrown Ukraine to the wolves as they usually do, as they always do with when they're done using someone.